How much should parents in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland save for their children to go to university? I'm Martin Lewis of MoneySavingExpert.com. We've launched a calculator for parents in England about the student parental contribution. But of course, when we did that, lots of you in the other UK nations said, "Oi, what about us?" So I want to explain the situation, but also to tell you the reason we haven't done the calculator for you is actually good news, because the parental contribution in the other UK nations is much less significant. Although in Scotland, in some circumstances, it can still be over £10,000 in total over a university course. At this point, I should explain what I mean by the parental contribution. It's the gap between what those on the lowest incomes are given by the state and the amount that students receive after a means test of family income. Now, family income for most under 25s is a proxy for parental income. In other words, the more your parents earn, the less, in most cases, you receive. Except in Wales, although it still does make a difference. So let me run through it now, nation by nation, and do the numbers. Let's start in Wales. Here, there is no parental contribution. Students all receive the same amount of money for living costs whilst at university. The only difference is the amount depends on whether you live at home, whether you live away from home, or whether you live away from home in London. If you live away from home, we'll take that as the base figure, students will receive just under £10,000 a year to live off. The only difference the means testing of family income, parental income, makes is how much of the money they get is a loan that they have to repay through the normal student finance system, and how much is a non-repayable grant. So very simply, here are the numbers. With family income of £19,000 or less, there will be a loan of roughly £2,000, and £8,000 of the money will be a non-repayable grant. If you have family income of around £60,000 or more, then the loan will be around £9,000 and the grant around £1,000. And if you're somewhere in the middle, it's a sliding scale. But as everybody receives in total the same amount of money, there is no parental contribution. Of course, that doesn't mean you might find your child hasn't got enough money to live off. That happens everywhere. But it means that no student from Wales gets any more or less money than the other from the state. They get the same amount of money. The only question is how much of it needs to be repaid. Now, let's take Scotland and Northern Ireland together, because the systems work the same way, although the actual amounts are different. Here, the amount of money you get is a combination of three different factors. Some of it is a loan that you repay through the student finance system, some of it is a grant that you don't have to repay, and some of it is the parental contribution. That's because students don't all get the same amount. The more that means test of family residual income, that proxy for parental income for under 25s is, the less total loan plus grant they get, leaving a gap of the parental contribution. And it also affects how much loan and grant you get. In general, the lower the family income, the more is grant, you get some loan and no parental contribution. The higher the family income, the less is a grant, the more is a loan, and the higher the parental contribution. But still, the amounts of the parental contribution here aren't huge, nothing like the English system. Let's get on to the numbers. For someone with family residual income, that proxy for the parental contribution, as I keep saying, of £21,000 or less, there would be a bursary for the students' living costs of around £2,000, and then a loan repaid through the student finance system. In Scotland, it's Plan 1 loans. I'm not going to overcomplicate it by explaining those right now. There's other information on the website that does explain that. That loan would be just under £6,000, which means total funds for living of just under £8,000. Once family income reaches £34,000 or above, so not that high, there's no bursary. There's a loan of just under £5,000. And that means to put that student in the same position as someone from a low-income background, parents would need to contribute £3,000. In my definition, a parental contribution of £3,000 a year, so £9,000 over a 3-year course, £12,000 over a 4-year course. Now, of course, for someone on an income, total family income of 35, 40 grand, that is a lot of money to find. So I think Scottish parents, you may need to look at saving for your children's future to be able to have that amount of money. Of course, there are no tuition fees in Scotland, which does offset it somewhat, but it still means actual cash to live off is something that you're going to have to look at if you're on even just a middle income, two earners middle income in Scotland. Okay, I'll do the numbers now for Northern Ireland. I feel a bit like I'm doing the Eurovision Song Contest each time I say that. So, for means tested family income of £19,000 or less, that proxy for parental income for under 25s, I keep saying it just so you don't forget, the student would get a grant of £3,500 and a loan repaid through the Plan 1 student loan system of around £3,000, so total living income of £6,500. If the income went up to £41,000 or more, there is no grant and there is a living loan of £5,000, which means there is a shortfall of £1,500 a year. What's interesting on the Northern Ireland system is actually the same shortfall is there from anyone with income above 30 grand, except you then do get some grant and some loan, but still the total amount of money you get is still only £5,000, which means there is a shortfall of £1,500 compared to students from lowest income family backgrounds. So you would, on a 4-year course, need to save up around £6,000 to be able to make up that gap. I'm not saying you can afford it, I'm just saying that's based on the numbers and roughly the scale of magnitude that you should be looking at. I hope that all makes sense. It is worth looking at the numbers. Remember, the key to the parental contribution is looking at the difference between the maximum amount someone could receive on the lowest income and the amount your student offspring would receive, or you, if it's a student, would receive based on that means test of family income, and looking at the gap there, because the amount that those on the lowest incomes get is roughly what has been assigned as the right amount for somebody to live off. I'm not saying it is, often that's still not enough, but that's what this is all about. I hope that helps.